There is a path clinging to a vertical cliff face, hundreds of feet above a river. Look down from it, and there is nothing beneath your feet but air and the white thread of water far below. The path is made of wooden planks, laid across beams that were driven into holes drilled into the solid rock of the cliff. A walkway bolted onto a precipice, with the mountain rising sheer on one side and the void dropping away on the other. People built this, by hand, on purpose. Hanging off the side of a cliff with simple tools, they cut into the rock and assembled a road where there was no ground at all, because they needed to get from one place to another, and the mountain stood in the way. Across the world, in the highest and most broken terrain on the planet, ancient peoples did this again and again, carved roads into the faces of cliffs, cut stairways into precipices, and strung bridges across canyons so deep that the bottom is lost in shadow. They built roads that seem to defy gravity, paths that look as though they hang in the air, in places where the sensible conclusion is that no road could possibly go. And the reason is not mystery. The reason is need. These roads are monuments to one of the most relentless qualities our species has, the refusal to accept that a place is unreachable. When the mountains said no, people found a way to build across its face, and the audacity of what they made is, even now, almost difficult to believe. Why build a road in the sky? To understand the roads that hang in the air, you first have to understand the problem they solve. Because from a distance, it can look like madness, and it is the opposite of madness. Mountains are barriers. They separate valleys from valleys, peoples from peoples, resources from the places that need them. And yet, human beings have always needed to cross them, to trade, to govern, to wage war, to carry messages, to move armies and goods and ideas from one side of a range to the other. A mountain you cannot cross is a wall, and a wall splits a world in two. When you face a mountain, you have a few choices. You can go around it, if there is a way around, but in the great ranges there often is not. The barrier runs for hundreds of miles. You can go over the top, through high passes, but the highest passes are deadly, buried in snow for much of the year, thin in air and brutal in cold. Or, when the terrain leaves you no gentle route, you can go across the mountain's face, following the contour of a cliff, cutting into the rock, building a ledge where nature provided none. This last option is the hardest and the most dangerous, and it is the one that produces the roads that seem to hang in the air. They were not built to amaze anyone. They were built because they were the only line that could be drawn between two places that had to be connected, across ground that offered no other path. That is the key to seeing these roads correctly. The vertigo they produce, the sense that they should not exist, is real, but it is a side effect, not the goal. Every plank road on a cliff and every stairway carved into a precipice represents a calculation that the connection was worth the cost, and the cost was enormous, in labor, in danger, in lives. People built roads in the sky because the alternative, staying cut off, was worse. The grander the road, the greater the need that drove it. And no civilization ever needed its roads more, or built them more boldly across impossible ground than the empire that ruled the spine of the Andes, the roads of the Inca. The Inca built one of the greatest road networks in the history of the world, and they did it across the most vertical inhabited terrain on the planet, through the high Andes, the second highest mountain range on Earth. The network is called the Capacñan, and at its height it ran for something on the order of 25,000 miles, threading through what are now 6 countries, binding together an empire that stretched thousands of miles down the western edge of South America. To grasp how astonishing that is, you have to add the constraints the Inca worked under. They had no wheeled vehicles, no iron tools, and no draft animals to pull loads or grade roads. They built this entire continental network with stone tools, bronze, and human hands, across mountains that rise miles into the sky. The Andes do not allow easy roads. The terrain is a chaos of soaring peaks, plunging gorges, and sheer cliffs, and the Inca road builders met it head-on. Where the land climbed steeply, they cut stairways directly into the mountainside, long flights of stone steps, ascending slopes too steep for any graded road. Where a cliff face stood in the way, they carved the road into the rock itself, a stone ledge running along a precipice with the drop falling away beside it. Where they crossed high wetlands and marshes, they raised stone causeways. Where the route demanded it, they drove tunnels through rock. The road adapted to whatever the mountain threw at it, and it did so with a consistency of construction: paved surfaces, drainage channels, retaining walls, markers, that reveals a centrally organized engineering tradition operating across an entire continent of vertical terrain. Spaced along the network were way stations, where travelers and runners could rest, and where the empire stored food and supplies, so that an army or a messenger moving along the road was never far from shelter and provisions. The road was not just a surface to walk on. It was an entire logistical system threaded through the mountains, with the infrastructure of a functioning state strung along its length at altitudes where simply breathing is hard work. And the road was alive with motion, because its purpose was connection. The Inca had no writing in the conventional sense and no horses, yet they moved information across their vast empire with remarkable speed, using a relay system of running messengers called chasquis. Stationed at intervals along the roads, these runners would sprint their stretch at full effort, carrying a message or a knotted cord record, and hand it off to the next runner waiting at the next station, who would carry it onward. Running in relay, day and night, the chasquis could move a message across astonishing distances in a single day, far faster than any single traveler could go, relayed hand-to-hand along roads that climbed stairways, hugged cliffs, and crossed canyons miles above the sea. The Capac Ñan was the nervous system of the empire, and the runners were its signals, flying along roads that hung in the thin air of the high Andes. But to keep moving, the runners needed to cross the gorges, and that required the most breathtaking element of the whole system: the bridges that hang from grass. In the Andes, the rivers run at the bottom of canyons so deep and so steep that there is no way down and across. The only way over is to span the gap in the air. And the Inca spanned those gaps with bridges woven out of grass. This sounds like it cannot be true, and it is one of the most remarkable engineering traditions in human history. The Inca built suspension bridges across deep canyons by twisting mountain grass into thin cords, braiding those cords into thicker ropes, and binding those ropes into massive cables as thick as a person's body, and then stretching the cables across the gorge, anchoring them on each side, and weaving a walkway and handrails between them. The result was a true suspension bridge, hanging across a chasm hundreds of feet above a raging river, made entirely of woven grass and the skill of the people who built it. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived and saw these bridges, some of them were genuinely frightened to cross, swaying spans of grass over deadly drops far longer and bolder than the stone bridges of Europe at the time. The Inca had solved the problem of the impossible gorge with nothing but grass, rope, and extraordinary engineering knowledge. The astonishing thing is that this tradition is not entirely dead. There is one last living Inca rope bridge called Quishuachaca, spanning a canyon of the Apurimac River in Peru, and every single year, for centuries, the local Quechua communities have rebuilt it by hand. Each year the old bridge is taken down, and a new one is woven from fresh grass, in a communal effort that draws hundreds of people from the surrounding villages over several days. The families harvest and dry the grass, twist it into cords, braid the cords into ropes, and combine the ropes into the great cables, working under the direction of a bridge master whose knowledge has been passed down through generations. Then they stretch the new cables across the gorge and weave the bridge back into existence, exactly as their ancestors did before the Spanish ever arrived. It is a bridge made of grass, suspended over a deadly river that has existed continuously for some 500 years, not because it is durable, but because a community rebuilds it every year and has never stopped. The bridge is permanent precisely because the knowledge to remake it is permanent. That, to me, is one of the most moving things in the entire history of human engineering. A road in the air, kept alive across the centuries by the refusal of a people to let the knowledge die. The plank roads of China. On the other side of the world, in the mountains of China, a different civilization solved the same problem of the impassable cliff in a different but equally audacious way, and produced the roads that most literally seem to hang in the air. They are called gallery roads, or plank roads, and the technique behind them is as bold as anything the Inca built. To cross a stretch of sheer cliff where there was no ledge to follow, ancient Chinese road builders would drill rows of holes directly into the vertical face of the rock. Into those holes they drove sturdy beams, cantilevered out from the cliff like the teeth of a comb. Across the projecting beams they laid planks, creating a continuous wooden walkway that clung to the face of the precipice, often hundreds of feet above the gorge or river below, sometimes with a roof overhead and a railing on the outer edge, sometimes with nothing between the traveler and the drop. These plank roads ran for miles through the most broken mountain country, especially through the Qinling Mountains and the routes leading into the region of Sichuan, a land so ringed by mountains that, as a famous old poem put it, the road into it was harder than the road to heaven. The plank roads were how you got in and out, clinging to the cliffs where no natural path existed. These roads were not minor footpaths. They were strategically vital arteries, fought over by armies, and they figure in some of the most famous episodes of Chinese military history. There is a celebrated stratagem from the wars that founded the Han Dynasty, captured in a saying that translates roughly as openly repairing the plank roads while secretly crossing elsewhere, a feint in which one general made a great show of rebuilding a burned plank road to convince the enemy he would attack along that route, while his real force slipped across by a different way. The plank roads mattered enough to build whole campaigns around, and they loomed large enough in the imagination that one of China's greatest poets devoted a famous work to the sheer terror of the roads into Sichuan, describing a route so steep and so perilous that it was, he wrote, harder than climbing to the sky. Some of these cliff paths survive in forms that still test the nerve of anyone who walks them. On one sacred mountain, a plank walkway bolted to a sheer vertical face, narrow boards laid on beams set into the rock, with a chain to grip and a vertical drop of hundreds of feet at your heels, has become known as one of the most frightening walks in the world. A direct descendant of the ancient cliff path tradition that Taoist pilgrims and builders established on these peaks long ago. Building these roads and maintaining them was a constant, dangerous labor, carried out by workers and soldiers suspended over the void, drilling into rock and setting beams on the faces of cliffs, where a slip meant death. The plank roads of China are the purest expression of the road that hangs in the air. A wooden path bolted to a vertical cliff, with the mountain at your shoulder and nothing at all beneath your feet. The temple that hangs from the cliff. The same Chinese tradition of building on the faces of cliffs produced something even stranger than a road, a temple that appears to hang in midair. On the side of a mountain in Shaanxi province clings the Hanging Monastery, a complex of wooden halls and walkways built into a cliff face roughly 1,500 years ago, perched high above the ground below and seeming to defy gravity entirely. The monastery is supported on the same principle as the plank roads, beams set into holes drilled deep into the cliff, cantilevering the structure out from the rock. The thin wooden poles that appear to prop it up from below are, in large part, supplementary. Much of the real support comes from the horizontal beams driven into the mountain, so that the buildings genuinely hang from the cliff rather than resting on the slender legs beneath them. Monks built it there, high and hard to reach, partly for the seclusion that a cliff offers, and partly because the position protected it from floods below and sheltered it from the worst of the weather. For 15 centuries, it has clung to the rock, a cluster of delicate wooden halls suspended on a precipice, connected by narrow walkways that hang over the drop. It is not a road, but it is built by the same logic and the same nerve. The willingness to treat a vertical cliff as buildable ground, to drill into the rock and hang human structures in the empty air where nothing should be able to stand. How they did it, and what it cost. Behind every one of these roads and bridges and cliff-hung structures lies an enormous, often invisible cost. And it is worth dwelling on, because the finished marvel hides the labor and the danger that produced it. Building a road into a cliff face means working on that cliff face, suspended on ropes or perched on narrow ledges, drilling and cutting and hauling stone or timber hundreds of feet above the ground, with the same drop beneath the builders that would later sit beneath the travelers. The Inca laborers who carved stairways and roads into Andean precipices worked at altitudes where the air is thin and the cold is severe, on slopes where a single misstep was fatal. The Chinese workers who drilled the cliffs for plank roads hung over gorges to set their beams. We do not have careful records of how many died building these roads, but the nature of the work makes it certain that the toll was heavy. Every road in the sky was paid for, in part, in the lives of the people who built it. And the cost did not end when the road was finished, because these structures demanded constant maintenance. A grass bridge had to be rebuilt at Keswachaka every year, forever. Wooden plank roads rotted, burned, and collapsed, and had to be repaired and replaced again and again. Cliff-cut roads were battered by rockfall and erosion. A road that hangs in the air is not a thing you build once and forget. It is an ongoing commitment, a relationship between a community and a piece of impossible terrain that has to be renewed continually or lost. The permanence of these roads was never the permanence of stone left alone. It was the permanence of effort sustained across generations, people choosing, year after year, to keep the connection open, to re-drill the rock and reweave the grass and relay the planks, because the road still mattered and the mountains still stood in the way. Why they still hang there? Step back and look at all of them. The Inca roads carved into Andean cliffs, the grass bridges rewoven every year over deadly rivers, the Chinese plank roads bolted to vertical rock, the temple hanging from its precipice, and what they share is not a technique or a material. It is an attitude toward the impossible. Each of them began with a place that could not be reached, and a barrier that could not be crossed. And each of them ended with people deciding that impossible was simply a problem that had not yet been solved with enough effort and enough nerve. They looked at a sheer cliff and saw a road. They looked at a canyon and saw a bridge. They looked at the void and decided to build across it. There is no mysticism in any of this, and it does not need any. The wonder of the roads that hang in the air is entirely human. It is the wonder of what people will do and risk and sustain in order to stay connected to one another across terrain that was designed by nothing and cares about nothing, and would happily keep every valley sealed off from every other valley forever. The mountains are indifferent. The roads are the answer to that indifference. Deliberate, dangerous, hard-won lines of connection, drawn across ground that offered none, by people who refused to be divided by stone and height and empty air. So the path still clings to the cliff, hundreds of feet above the river, exactly where they built it. The last grass bridge still hangs across its gorge, rewoven this year as it was rewoven 500 years ago. And somewhere in the high mountains, where the sensible conclusion is that no road could ever go, a road goes anyway. A ledge in the rock, a span of woven grass, a line of planks in the open air, left behind by people who decided that the other side was worth reaching, and that no amount of empty space beneath their feet was going to stop them from getting there.